Thank you all for coming today. Thank you to the Maine Jewish Museum. It is an honor to have my work hanging in this beautiful historic building. Can you all hear me okay? Am I loud enough? And for my work to be considered relevant to the mission of the museum, I'm thrilled to finally have the opportunity to work with the esteemed curator Nancy Davidson for her last show here at the museum. And I very much enjoyed working with Allison as she takes over the reins. When Nancy and Allison asked me if I would like to do a talk in conjunction with the show, I immediately replied yes, with more conviction and excitement than one might expect from someone who spends so much time alone in her studio. Despite a tremendous fear of public speaking, I welcome this chance to share my thoughts about my work and to offer insights that I hope will help you connect with my images on a deeper level. On belonging. The paintings and drawings in this exhibit are a reflection of my experience with belonging. Throughout my life, I have searched for meaningful connections with others. I have tried to understand what it means to be part of a larger community and what it means to be a single solitary self. Although my Jewish heritage was not a consistent part of my childhood, I have always felt its presence in my sense of who I am. I was born to a non-practicing Jewish mother and a non-present Episcopalian father. My childhood was marked by a fair amount of instability, defined by a constantly shifting landscape of place and family. We moved frequently, and divorce and strained family relationships left me without solid ground. Of course, as a child, this was just my norm, my life, to settle into a different house, a different school, a different community. I tried to make new friends. I tried to comprehend a shifting definition of family. I attempted to piece together the fragments of the different religions I was offered into something that could provide an explanation, a tradition, a path, a sense of belonging. There's no question that throughout my formative years, the one place I returned to again and again to make sense of the world was my artwork. As a young child, I lived in Chicago, where I was fortunate enough to take art lessons at the Art Institute. From Chicago, we moved to Virginia, where I found sanctuary in nature, which became an incredibly important part of how I see my place in the world. From Virginia, I went to Yale, where I majored in art. Of course, I had to maintain my pattern of switching schools, so I took a break from Yale after my freshman year to attend what was then the Portland School of Art for 3 semesters, during which time I absolutely fell in love with the coast of Maine. My younger adult years were spent painting intensely. This was my comfort zone, my home. Believe it or not, I had maintained a notion of myself as an abstract painter throughout my college years. In retrospect, this was mostly an attempt to avoid the fact that realism does not come naturally to me. I had worked extremely hard in high school with a wonderful teacher and mentor to develop my representational drawing skills. As a teenager, Georgia O'Keeffe was my favorite painter, and I had grand plans to create abstract imagery that would reflect my love of nature. It was upon leaving Yale that I had to admit that my avoidance of realism had left me unprepared. I realized once I started painting on my own that in order to make meaningful abstraction, I needed to develop my skills and use them as a launching point. So I started setting up still lifes for myself. I painted only fruits and vegetables and became completely enamored with the process of closely examining forms until I understood them well enough to render them successfully. I was hooked on realism. My early work was really about my love of natural forms. I would go for walks on the beach, in the woods, on the streets of Portland. Something would catch my eye. Shells, seaweed, branches, plants. I would bring them home to my studio and play with various arrangements until something struck a chord visually. I didn't have a theme or a meaning in mind, nothing I was consciously trying to communicate through my work, other than my love of the fascinating and beautiful objects I was rendering. As I wrote at the time, my artistic process begins with a deliberate openness to and awareness of the visual world. When I experience an emotional reaction to something I see in the woods or along the ocean shore, I know I've discovered an image that holds meaning for me. I often do not understand exactly why the form I see resonates so intensely, but I follow my emotional response. As I explore the visual potential of the form in 2 dimensions, I'm always delighted by the first moment of recognition. Suddenly, the reason for my initial reaction becomes apparent to me. The result of my response to the form unfurls on the canvas or paper, revealing the source of its inspiration. The entire creative process enables me to decipher, through form and image, the layers of reality at work beneath the surface of my consciousness. By removing the objects from their natural context and arranging them in a new environment, I allow them to develop new associations. The simplicity of my compositions emphasizes the way the organic forms interact with each other and the space around them. Separated from their origins and presented without distraction, I can focus on the individual objects and appreciate them not only for what they are, but for what they might represent. Each branch reveals curves, bends, bumps, and scars that express its unique character. A vine twists and wraps itself around a branch, a path through space. A seed holds the potential of an individual as it suggests immeasurable possibilities. The first time I created work that had a clear meaning for me was, interestingly, the first time I ever felt a true sense of belonging. This was not something I was necessarily aware of at the time, but I don't think it's a coincidence. When I was 37, I made the difficult decision to devote some of my life to something other than art. After a challenging first trimester, I settled into the experience of pregnancy with the realization that after many, many years of feeling like I didn't belong, after years of struggling to relate to other people, I suddenly had something huge in common with a whole lot of people. All of a sudden, I was able to find an easy, obvious topic of conversation, a meaningful way to connect to most other adult women in the world. I had joined the tribe of motherhood. As I wrote in a statement about the moonshell drawings, the unblemished moonshell is round and smooth, with delicate grooves built around a spiral structure. It begins life as an egg embedded in the sand, emerging to swim briefly in the shallow waters before settling to the bottom of the sea. The hard encasing protects the living organism inside as it plows through the sands, gets tossed by the waves and pulled by the tides. The sea heaves the moonshell against the rocks. Seagulls pluck the shell from the coast, discarding the empty casing back onto the shore. Eventually, the shell begins to show signs of wear as tiny cracks and fractures emerge. These scars interrupt the perfect spiral of the moonshell. The once completely protected inner chamber can now be glimpsed. Through the small holes and narrow fissures is a dark, mysterious space. Larger gaps and crevices reveal the vulnerable insides until, eventually, the shell is so broken that there seems to be little that distinguishes the outer shell from the inside it once sheltered. The moonshell drawings emerged during the time I was pregnant with my son. I was thinking about his home inside my body and about my hope to provide a safe environment for him to grow. I wondered if my imperfect physical and psychological self really had everything it took to create a healthy space to nurture him. Those concerns evolved to questions about our family, our home, our world, all of which are in some way fractured and flawed. I offer the moonshells as portraits of the strength and beauty embodied in each of our unique imperfections. Of course, my life as an artist shifted significantly once my son was born. I loved motherhood so much that the plan for one child, whose presence I knew would decrease my studio time, evolved to include 2 wonderful children and even less studio time. It was hence quite a few years later that I finally immersed myself in a new series, investigating the intriguing invasive plant called dodder. Again, I will read my artist statement. When I first discovered a patch of dodder vine wrapping around dried stalks of flowers, I was fascinated by the tiny clusters of seeds and the graceful tangle of vines. My initial response was visual. I wanted to paint it. In my first body of oil painting since becoming a mother, I explored this intricate, delicate, tenacious plant and began to feel an affinity for the host. As a mother, I stand strong and sturdy like the stalk of the host, while the daughter, with almost no chlorophyll of its own, holds on tight. The tiny tendril can only grow with the nurturance and support of the host. I present these entities for consideration like portraits. Each stem, vine, and seed clustered together represents a life. I keep my grounds minimal so that we can contemplate each life as it carves its path through the world. Sometimes there is one, sometimes there's more than one. I hope that they will be considered knowing that there are more, perhaps on the same canvas, perhaps on another canvas. There is the possibility of a relationship between these isolated, independent, and sometimes solitary beings. The space around each daughter becomes charged with potential, just as the seeds of the plants hold the potential for new life. My sense of belonging had evolved from the tribe of motherhood to an unmistakable, unshakable role in my immediate family. I was the source of strength and stability for two little people who depended on me for their survival. There was no questioning my important place. What happened next shook us all. I was firmly entrenched in my incredibly rewarding, meaningful, busy life as a mother, and had just started to get into a regular painting routine again with both of my kids in school when the pandemic began. Again, from my statement. In the Beach Leaves series, I present these natural forms as representatives of our human experience. These paintings and drawings grew out of the COVID pandemic as an exploration into the notion of a pandemic pod. Many of us spent months isolated with just a few select people. This body of work presents relationships of small, isolated groups that I hope will resonate as we recognize and process how our connections may have changed during this time. Some relationships, out of necessity, may have had to drift, while others may have become more intense. Some may be marked by distance and longing, or come into clearer focus as we have taken a close look at who is with us, both physically and emotionally. The beach leaves are ultimately about the relationships that have sustained us, the people with whom we created our protected reality, and with whom we have moved forward. That was the point at which I realized that all of my work has always been about our fundamental human need for connection. My minimal compositions, which at first glance seem to be about the beauty of the fascinating natural forms themselves, are just as much about the interaction of the forms. The space between the objects speaks to the relationships with each other, the closeness, the leaning in, the distance, the longing, the tension, the support. My paintings and drawings are left essentially untitled to allow you, the viewer, to interpret them in relation to your own experience. A lone leaf will, for some, speak of solitude. For others, it may conjure strength and perseverance. A sliver of space between forms may suggest a desire for closeness to some of you, a need for a little distance for others. It is in this spirit that I offer each of these compositions to you, in hopes that you can glimpse yourself, your loved ones, your desire for connection, your search for a sense of belonging.